So let's talk about something that's a real intellectual puzzle, one that sits right at the heart of faith and reason. How are we supposed to understand stories in the Quran that seem to just completely defy the laws of nature? Are they literal, supernatural events? Or is there maybe another way to look at them? Today, we're going to explore one specific, pretty rationalist interpretation that offers a fascinating answer.
All right, here's our roadmap. We're going to build this argument piece by piece. We'll start with the word miracle itself, then we'll look at a foundational principle in the Quran. From there, we'll find the key to unlock the text, and then we're going to test that key on two of the most famous stories you can think of. And finally, we'll step back and see what this all means for having a rational faith today.
All right, so where do we even begin with a puzzle like this? Well, according to the way of thinking we're exploring today, a lot of the confusion really just boils down to a single crucial word and how it gets translated.
Yeah, this is really the heart of the matter, isn't it? Is the Quran telling us about these magic tricks that break the laws of physics? Or is it pointing towards something else, something maybe even more profound?
Okay, so get this. The Arabic word that's so often translated as miracle is ayah, but its real core meaning isn't a supernatural event. It actually means a sign, evidence, or proof. It's something that points to a deeper reality, not something that breaks reality.
And this is where it gets really interesting. Because when the Quran gives examples of its ayat, its signs, it doesn't talk about walking on water. It points to the incredibly complex, beautiful, and consistent patterns of the world around us. The orbit of the moon, the cycle of rain, our own biology. These are the signs of a purposeful design.
Now, this idea of signs in nature isn't just a standalone concept. It's actually built on something much, much bigger, a foundational principle that really holds this entire interpretation together.
You see, the Quran talks about this principle called sunnatullah. You can think of it as God's established way of doing things, the laws of the universe. And this verse makes it crystal clear. That system is consistent. It's reliable. It doesn't just change on a whim.
And you know, this isn't just a one-off mention. It's hammered home again and again. The point, from this perspective, is that divine action works through the elegant laws of nature, not by constantly breaking them.
So, here's the logical conclusion we have to draw from this, right? If the text itself insists that God's laws are unchanging, then any story that seems to break those laws, well, it must mean something else. We have to read it in a different light.
So you've got this apparent contradiction. Unchanging laws on one hand, and stories that seem to violate them on the other. So what do? Well, what's really fascinating is that this school of thought says the Quran actually gives us its own instruction manual for how to deal with exactly this problem.
Okay, so check this out. Verse 3:7 basically lays out this powerful key. It says there are two kinds of verses. You've got the maqamat. These are the clear foundational principles, the bedrock of the book. An example? God's laws are unchanging. Then you have the mutasabihat. These are the allegorical, metaphorical stories. And the rule is simple. You have to use the clear foundational verses to understand the allegorical ones.
All right, we've got our key. Let's, take it for a spin. First up, let's look at a story we all know, the creation of Adam.
So instead of a magical, poof, he's there kind of creation, which, by the way, would break that rule of unchanging natural law, this reading sees it as this beautiful allegory for evolution. The Quranic terms line up with stages, starting from basic organic compounds, developing through complex chemistry, becoming a biological organism, and finally, the blowing of spirit, which represents the dawn of consciousness. It's a symbolic story of where we came from. Okay, that was the warm-up. Now for the main event. Let's apply this exact same key, interpreting allegory through foundational principles, to one of the most famous, most debated stories of all, the birth of Jesus.
Now, this is where things get really controversial for some, because according to this analysis, the Quran itself seems to throw a wrench in the works of the traditional story. This verse right here, for example, explicitly puts Jesus, Isa, right in the middle of a biological lineage of previous prophets.
And that word dhurriya is super important here. It's not a vague term. It means biological descendants, and in that culture, that meant through the father. So if Jesus is part of this dhurriya, well, the conclusion within this framework is unavoidable. He had to have had a biological father.
And then there's this other piece of evidence. Just look at the parallel here. Mary's surprise, how can I have a son, is presented in the exact same way as Zechariah's surprise about his son, John. In both situations, the circumstances were really improbable. An old, infertile couple on one hand, a woman not in a relationship on the other, but not physically impossible. and the divine reply is identical. It is easy for me. This interpretation reads that as, it will happen through the natural laws I've already set up.
So, when you put all these pieces together, what's the conclusion from this point of view? It's that the Quran is doing something incredibly clever. It's upholding natural law, it's protecting Mary's honor by framing the birth as part of a divine plan, and it deliberately makes the father's identity a non-issue to focus our attention on what actually matters, Jesus' message and his mission as a human prophet.
Okay, so we've gone through the details, the verses, the arguments, but let's zoom out. What does all of this actually mean? What's the big takeaway here?
What it means is that you end up with this worldview where you don't have to choose between your faith and your understanding of the natural world. They're not at war. By using the Quran's own interpretive key, they can become two harmonious ways of looking at a single, consistent reality.
And that's what's so powerful about this perspective. It kind of liberates the text. It no longer has to be defended as a science or history textbook. Instead, its real guidance on ethics, on justice, on purpose can shine through. And that leaves us with a really fascinating question to chew on. If we stop looking for supernatural violations of nature, what other profound truths, hidden away in allegory, are just waiting for us to discover?